There are stories so deeply embedded in school books that they stop sounding like theories and start feeling like facts. Stories repeated so often they harden into certainty. And one of the strongest of those stories is this. During the Ice Age, a small group of people crossed a frozen land bridge from Siberia into Alaska, walked south, and became the first Americans. Simple, neat, comfortable. But when scientists finally let DNA speak for itself, that clean story began to fracture. Not all at once, quietly, piece by piece. Because the genetic trail of America's first settlers doesn't move in a straight line. It twists, it doubles back, it splits, and it leads to places few people ever expected. When researchers began extracting ancient DNA from Ice Age skeletons, teeth, bone fragments, frozen remains preserved for thousands of years, they expected confirmation. What they found instead was disruption. The earliest Americans weren't a single wave, they weren't a single people, and they didn't all come from one place. Genetic markers began pointing not only to Siberia, but to deep, ancient populations that no longer exist as distinct groups today. Ghost populations, entire human branches that vanished, leaving only fragments behind in the DNA of modern indigenous peoples. And that realization changed everything. Because when scientists compared Ice Age American DNA with populations across Eurasia, they noticed something strange. The genetic signature didn't perfectly match any living Siberian group. It wasn't East Asian in the modern sense. It carried traits from ancient North Eurasians, people who lived during the Ice Age across a vast stretch of land from Europe to Central Asia. Mammoth hunters, steppe nomads, survivors of extreme cold. These people didn't just contribute to Native American ancestry, they contributed to Europeans too, meaning the split between Old World and New World wasn't as clean as anyone assumed. Before moving deeper into this story, it's worth saying this is the kind of discovery GenealogyX exists for, where genetics pulls history out of the shadows. If you're curious about the hidden journeys carried inside human DNA, this is the place to be. The Ice Age world was brutal. Vast ice sheets swallowed continents. Sea levels dropped hundreds of feet. Entire coastlines that exist today were dry land then. And between Asia and North America sat a massive region known as Beringia. Not a narrow bridge, but a wide, habitable landmass filled with grasslands, rivers, and animals. DNA now shows that people didn't simply pass through Beringia, they lived there for thousands of years, long enough to become genetically distinct from their Asian ancestors. This wasn't a migration corridor, it was a homeland. And here's where the story flips. Genetic evidence suggests that the ancestors of Native Americans became isolated in Beringia during the height of the Ice Age, cut off by glaciers to the east and west, trapped but surviving. Over generations, their DNA changed. When the ice finally began to retreat, these people didn't move as one group. They spread in multiple directions. Some went south through ice-free corridors. Others followed coastlines by boat, hugging the Pacific edge long before interior routes opened. This explains something archaeologists struggled with for decades: why some of the oldest sites in the Americas appear too early for the land bridge timeline. Sites like Monteverde in Chile, coastal sites in California, evidence that people were already deep in the Americas while massive ice sheets still blocked inland travel. And DNA backs it up. Ancient genomes show at least two major founding populations, not one. One lineage spread widely and became the ancestors of most indigenous peoples across North America and South America. Another lineage appears briefly in ancient remains, then fades, absorbed or replaced, a genetic echo of people who arrived early, lived briefly, and disappeared. Then comes an even bigger surprise. Some Ice Age American DNA contains traces of Australasian ancestry, genetic markers shared with indigenous Australians and Melanesians. Not enough to suggest direct migration across the Pacific, but enough to prove deep ancestral connections in Asia long before the Ice Age. This means the roots of America's first settlers stretch far deeper into humanity's past than Siberia alone. And that challenges a long-held assumption that migration into the Americas was late, limited, and simple. It wasn't. It was ancient, complex, and shaped by climate catastrophe. Now picture the people themselves: small groups, families, children, moving across tundra where the horizon never ended, hunting mammoth and bison, wearing stitched animal hides, speaking languages lost forever. They weren't thinking about continents or discoveries, they were surviving, and in doing so, they carried DNA that would become the foundation of two entire continents. But even that foundation wasn't fixed. As these early Americans spread south, their DNA adapted. Groups split, some went east, some went west, some reached the Amazon, others climbed into the Rockies. Genetic diversity exploded, and with it came thousands of cultures, languages, and identities, none of them static. Then came another shock. DNA shows that some later migrations from Asia entered North America after the first settlers, not replacing them, but mixing. This is visible today in Arctic populations whose DNA reflects a later wave tied to Inuit and Yupik ancestors, meaning America's settlement didn't end with the Ice Age. It continued, slowly, repeatedly, which raises a question history avoided for a long time. If America's first people came from multiple waves, from deep Ice Age Eurasian roots, from populations that no longer exist, then the idea of a single first American collapses. There was no singular beginning. There was a process, and modern DNA carries it forward. Today, indigenous peoples across the Americas carry genetic signatures of Ice Age survival, markers that trace back to Beringia, to ancient Siberia, to North Eurasian hunters, to forgotten human branches. Their DNA is a living archive, proof of endurance through extinction-level cold, isolation, and migration on a scale humanity has never repeated. And yet, for centuries, this story was flattened, simplified, reduced to arrows on maps. DNA refused to stay quiet. Every new genome extracted from ancient remains adds depth, adds contradiction, adds humanity. It shows that the Americas were not the final chapter of human migration, but one of its most extraordinary experiments. So what does this mean now? It means that the people who first called the Americas home were not late arrivals to history. They were veterans of humanity's harshest era, descendants of Ice Age survivors whose bloodlines outlasted glaciers, megafauna extinction, and environmental collapse. It also means that modern people, whether indigenous, American, or anywhere else, are more connected to that ancient story than they realize. The Ice Age isn't distant. It's encoded, passed down silently through generations. And when people today take DNA tests and see Native American ancestry, or unexpected Asian markers, or deep ancient components that don't match modern nations, they're seeing echoes of that Ice Age world, a time when borders didn't exist, when survival mattered more than identity, when humanity moved not to conquer, but to endure. America's real founding story doesn't begin with ships or flags. It begins with ice, with footsteps across frozen land, with families who never knew they were becoming ancestors to millions. And the most humbling truth of all is this: their story didn't end. It's still here, in bone, in blood, in memory written into every strand of DNA. For anyone who wants to keep exploring how DNA reshapes the story of humanity, GenealogyX dives into these mysteries every day, uncovering the past that still lives inside us.